is Civilization, Overshoot, and You, a quick overview for anyone who's curious about what's happening on our planet, why, and what it means for modern humans. But you only have like 20 minutes. So, these are some examples of life on Earth. They do stuff like hunt, store food, create homes, and they have cool ways to stay safe from predators sometimes, or deal with the weather. But if there's nothing to eat in their area and they can't swim or fly somewhere else, they might go hungry. And if there's a heat wave or a blizzard, they can seek shelter, but they're still gonna feel it. And if they get sick or injured, either they recover or they don't. And that's how it goes for most organisms, not just animals, but the other kingdoms like plants, and not just today, but for the 4 billion years that life has been on Earth. Whereas humans, who are members of a civilization, especially during the modern era, plus any non-humans who we've admitted to our club, get unique benefits. A global food supply chain, comfortable interiors, not just our homes, but our vehicles and elsewhere, medical interventions, and more. So why? Why is our situation so different? In 10,000 BC, the most recent ice age ended and Earth entered the Holocene, when temperatures stabilized at about 13.8 degrees Celsius, which turns out was great for seasons and agriculture. Plus, we came up with the plow. And so some human societies began large-scale farming, and that meant a consistently abundant food supply. And for any year that the number of individuals who died is less than the number of individuals born, you've added to the population. So with this food supply, we started having more and more years that were a net addition versus a net subtraction. And then because farming or plowing means that we were churning out food so efficiently, those additional humans didn't all need to join the farming effort. They could build, invent, be full-time healers. And this ended up being this kind of upward spiral where more food meant more people, meant more early machines taking over more of the physical labor, more people flowing into other jobs, and so on and so forth. And suddenly you've got kings and soldiers, right? And then fast forward to the modern era, and we've taken this approach global. Most of us can just look around and see signs that humans were here, right? The planet has been redesigned by humans for humans. I'm talking about things like farms and stores, trucks that bring things to us and trucks that take things away, the roads that they drive on. Our plumbing, our lighting, our home decor, which was made by someone else using materials from somewhere else. Our classrooms, the ways we get around, the ways we communicate, and the fact that someone in New Jersey can eat bananas and avocados. The advancements that help us feel better and do more. And all the options we have for recording information and memories and being entertained. Look at our world and our average civilized human week, and then compare that to other creatures, and you'll see that these are totally distinct situations and experiences. There's this whole planet that covers the whole system that covers the planet, but it's all us. And we don't think that's weird. It's just it's our thing that we do, and it's not the thing that the other creatures do, and that's just how it is. We're just special. And we teach kids that, well, these were man's greatest achievements. The start of civilization was this big historic moment, and it was a good one because it made everything that followed possible, and it'll continue forever. Obviously, that's supposedly a given. And it's what we're all here to do. We're here to participate and keep it running, whether you're an employer or an employee, maybe you're a parent, and we just kind of sit back and watch as the whole thing just gets better, right? And maybe even you or your kids will be the ones to make the next big improvement. That's how the game works. But looking at it from another angle, here's how land was when we started agriculture 12,000 years ago. We've been gradually converting more and more forest and grassland, about half of it at this point, developing it into cities, suburbs, plants, which are for only humans to eat, or plants to feed animals that are for only humans to eat. Meanwhile, here we see biomass versus anthropogenic mass, meaning the left is everything like plants and animals and bacteria, all the living stuff that was on the earth before we started doing civilization. And the thing is on the right is all the man-made matter that we've extracted and then turned into other stuff. So concrete, brick, metal, asphalt. So before agriculture, the tower on the left was twice as high and the tower on the right was non-existent. Now you can see that they're actually equal. And so this whole process that we've been going through has consisted of bringing this one down and building this one up. And here's the impact that that's had on land mammals. So, not so surprisingly, as we've taken over more land and turned it into the human-serving world, the amount of other living things has decreased. Oops. So, the weight of all animals, or rather all humans, before civilization was 1% of the total weight of all land mammals, and everything else was the other species. We were a tiny minority. So for every 100 pounds of human, you'd have 99 times that of all the other guys, right? Now it's the reverse. Those other land mammals, and this is just showing the ones that existed in my state, are down to 2%, and we, plus our livestock that feeds us, are the majority. And a species can't just do what we've done to get where we are and get away without any consequences. Here's a basic diagram of how life operates. It's a process of converting matter and energy into other forms, and it works really well when there is harmony and balance. But if one part is turned up too high, it wrecks the whole thing. So for example, if the bunny is bunnying too hard, it's going to be eating all the dandelions and pooping too much, and so the source becomes depleted to just this blank patch, and the sink gets overloaded. The other parts of the system can't keep up. And we say that the species is in overshoot. It has exceeded the environment's carrying capacity. Overshoot cannot continue forever. And so when humans do civilization, we are operating on overdrive. We're disturbing harmony and balance, and we are causing a mass extinction. So imagine, look at this, 69%. Imagine if 69% of humans just disappeared over 50 years. And although we have had mass casualty events in recent history, our population has actually been increasing. The last time the human population fell was in the 1300s. And note that, this is showing insects, but it's probably true for most species, that climate change is not the major factor yet. Mainly, it's been that we're poisoning other species with pesticides, pushing them off of their homes and out of their food sources, which we are replacing with our buildings, lawns, roads, and food sources. So, other impacts. By now, we've all heard of microplastics. They are everywhere in the clouds and rain and glaciers, our tap water, soil, and most of our food, and that way it makes it into our organs. It's been detected in a lot of them, and it is disrupting our endocrine systems, which is leading to babies now being born prematurely at a higher rate, sperm counts are falling, and rates of cancer are rising, especially in younger generations. Here are some headlines about that. Younger generations, people who are still in their 30s, are now seeing cancer pop up at unprecedented rates. It's not just a detection thing, there's more of it happening. And another thing is we are causing eutrophication and hypoxia. So our artificial synthetic fertilizers are running off into large waterways, causing algae blooms, and then that is choking out other life. And also, when you take the human population and the livestock population and you multiply them times 100 and cram them all together, you get contagious disease. So that's in the air, in the water, and with the warming climate and mosquitoes' ranges expanding, we can count on a higher risk of the blood-borne stuff like malaria too. See, I haven't talked much about climate change, but back to that. Of course, it's caused by fossil fuels and carbon dioxide emissions. And remember that a key moment in civilization's history was when the temperatures reached 13.8 degrees Celsius. In 2023, the average temperature was 15.34. And of course, it could still fluctuate a little bit up and down, but it's pretty significant that we have increased it from 13 point something to 15 point something. And you might think that that's not a lot, but it's kind of like a fever where a small change makes a big difference. So here, what's Earth's temperature for the planet's entire existence, squashed and simplified. So you can see the temperatures along the left, 10, 17, 25. And when we crank up the temperature to 17 centigrade, and when it was hovering in those low 20s, that's when the dinosaurs were around. And they were cold-blooded, reptiles, amphibians, fish, insects. So they didn't have to worry about heat stroke, and they also didn't have crops that they had to keep growing. Meanwhile, the South Pole, despite being in darkness a lot of the year, was probably a temperate, swampy rainforest. And meanwhile, when the temperature was turned down to 8 degrees Celsius, that was the last ice age. New York City was under a glacier 2 miles deep. So a few degrees gets you a very different planet, and it's not necessarily one that is friendly to the things that we like to do to survive. 13.8 was really our little sweet spot that we were all used to living with, and now here we are at 15 plus and climbing. So yeah, in addition to our man-made chemicals and construction projects, heat is now joining the party to take its toll. Headlines like these are not hard to find. We've got bats dying in Australia, monkeys dying in Mexico, penguins dying because the ice where they used to live is melting. And, as we saw earlier, these aren't just isolated incidents. It is adding up to actual extinction. And it is happening not just on the land, but also in water. Because if the heat kills the plankton, then the fish and whales have nothing to eat, which means then the seals and birds have nothing to eat. And so it is this ripple effect that moves up the food chain. And also, carbon emissions are acidifying the ocean. It absorbs that extra CO2, and then that changes the makeup, and organisms that have shells aren't able to grow them. And of course, the familiar wildfires, heat waves, and storms, which are harming us and slowly destroying the world that we've built. And also, they're throwing off the seasons, which should scare us more than it does, because all of nature's rhythms work best when they're synchronized. So if the temperature isn't lining up the way it used to with day lengths, it throws things off, including pollination, and that's necessary for the crops, which are nice to have. I like food. And so we also see flood, drought, hail, freezes. Again, these are headlines that are not hard to find. The pictures here are from the past year in the UK, Iowa, and Italy. You can see the floods, the Brussels sprouts, the cracking soil for the corn, and the shriveled fruit. And on the other hand, our ability to burn fossil fuels is going to start decreasing. And you might say, well, you just were telling me how bad they are, so isn't this a good thing? And it is good news for the planet, but it is bad news, once again, for civilization. See, it used to be easy to extract oil. It would shoot up out of the ground, versus now we need to build offshore rigs, frack, go after all these other non-conventional methods. And so the impact that has, if we look here, so this very top of all these layers, that's reflecting how much fossil fuels we've been able to extract in total. And generally, with some exceptions, we have been able to beat our record every year. And then the section here that is this pale orange that is kind of getting fatter, especially in the later part, is the chunk that you have to deduct, because as we invest more energy building the rigs, doing the fracking, all that kind of processing and everything, you can't really count that towards the total, right? You have to subtract it out, because after you do all that, it's really just what's left over that you can use for all of the other things that support the civilization. And so, even though so far the amount that we've been extracting has been rising, which has kept employment rising and investments rising, we're going to start to see it flatten and then go down. So I've marked the 70s energy crisis, the 1980s stock market crash, later on this 2020s lockdown slump, and then that final big arrow is nature saying, oh, you guys call that a lockdown? Hold my beer. So this also doesn't mean that there is no oil left. It just means that extracting it is going to get more challenging. And so instead of being able to do more and more each year, the amount that we're able to extract is going to start getting lower and lower. And then on top of that, physics is going to be taking a bigger and bigger cut, which reduces it further. And the thing is, fossil fuels are what power our economy. There are 5 billion actual human workers, but then we actually have 500 billion invisible assistants, or the equivalent of 500 billion extra people that run on fuel and electricity. And those doing the heavy lifting is why so many humans aren't out plowing fields. And it makes it possible to communicate across long distances and all that. So what happens when that support system stops growing and starts falling away? And here's what the introduction of fossil fuels has done for the population. So I'll repeat the same question. What happens when the support system starts growing and starts falling away? We went from horizontal pretty much to basically vertical. And then you might say, well, what about renewables? Good question. What renewables? Because this is a graph of our energy sources, and you can see that despite the hype, things that we think about when we say renewable, like solar panels and wind turbines, they're tiny little slivers. So you can start at the bottom, look your way up. It is mostly fossil fuels. Then you've got nuclear, hydropower, wind, and solar. They are just tiny slivers. And, well, hydropower, you could say, is that light blue chunk. That's a little bit more substantial, but then now droughts are starting to hinder that. So that is not a promising option. And in terms of expanding the other segments, the solar, the wind, the nuclear fission, or even fusion, well, our soon to be shrinking annual fossil fuel budget is going to limit that. Because we're talking about the next round of humans laying down infrastructure. Before, it was the Romans and their aqueducts, and now it's this. It's panels and turbines and reactors to generate it. It's power lines to transmit that electricity. It's batteries to store it, and it doesn't matter what they're made of. We're still invading the environment to take something out, which is easiest to do when you're running on fossil fuels. And all the stuff that's supposed to run on electricity, because 80% of our man-made world is powered by fuel engines, not electricity. And all of this requires mining, manufacturing, transportation, installation. That is heavy industry, industrial era activities. Plus, the world that already surrounds us, which we kind of want to keep running while we're doing all of this, right? Well, that runs mostly on fossil fuels, and they're going to be dwindling, so we definitely can't do it all. Or maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we have all the fuel we need to make plenty of clean energy. Well, then that's just more of the same old planet-wrecking activity. So we want to believe that we can take a planet that's already in bad shape, work some magic, and yeah, a big part of that is the kind of activity that we've been doing, which damages the planet, but for some reason, like, it doesn't count. And then what comes out the other end is that civilization will continue to function because it's been perfected, and Earth will have healed, and everything will be okay. That's a fairy tale. When we do civilization, when we're maintaining cities, which means plumbing and large farms and roads to connect them, not to mention in the modern era, factories and electricity and communications infrastructure, we are still operating in overdrive, and we are still wrecking our already devastated environment. We've got one planet, and these green visions that would not qualify as living in harmony in terms of that bunny diagram, it's still engaging in dead-end behavior. And here's the thing, people are correctly identifying harmful things. But at the same time, they're missing the big picture. Like, Elon Musk does suck. And so does capitalism and corporate greed. And air travel emissions are bad. And so are Republicans who weaken the EPA, and consumerism in the meat industry. And of course, fossil fuels and plastics, for sure. That is all bad for the environment. But you could address all of these and we'd still be on the dead end path. Previous civilizations didn't have these things, and they still self-destructed. So when people march and divest and vote for candidates who are serious about climate action, part of the vision that we're fighting for is, and one of the things that we're afraid of losing, is to maintain or even expand civilization type activity, which equates to a permanent overdrive state. And that is A, an impossible goal, like it breaks the laws of physics, and B, incompatible with our other goal of improving Earth's ecological situation. It's like we think that evil people are driving our bus toward a cliff, and if we just take control of the steering wheel and convert the bus to run on electricity and fix a few other things, it'll all be okay. But actually, there is no steering wheel. We're all kind of pedaling this thing together. No one's in charge. The bus itself is the program or the problem, and it already went off the cliff. We're just experiencing some outward momentum before gravity takes over. Our only options, again, based on like what laws say is actually physically and ecologically possible, is either we let the whole operation go, we stop building up the gray tower of the man-made world, or we keep things going, but that leads to self-destruction. So actually, either way, it's a no-go for civilization. And that's why, among people who are aware of this situation, we say that it is a predicament, not a problem, because problems have solutions, predicaments can only be responded to. We can take this info and let it shape how we think and behave, but from civilization's perspective, there is no happy ending solution. And this seems like a good time to point out that people aren't bad. There are plenty examples from past and present of humans having a positive impact on their environment. The problem isn't humans. The problem is civilization, creating this infrastructure and keeping all these processes going. But most of us were born into captivity. And the cage has been expanded to include most of the planet and most members of our species and others. So your only option to survive is to just keep pressing the right buttons and making the right sounds in meetings so that you can earn tokens, so that you can exchange them for food, and don't question what happens beyond the empire, which like there isn't even much of that anyway left. And more importantly, do not question whether this can all continue. Only a few other species cooperate in this ultra-social way that we do with division of labor and farming, ants and termites. And that emergent phenomenon is called a superorganism. We are like mindless zombies contributing to the superorganism's mission without actually understanding what it all adds up to and where it's leading. So, speaking of where it's leading, this is a limits to growth scenario. People started running these simulations in 1972, and we keep updating it with better tech and fresh data. And there's a lot more to this than the first impression, but one of the basic messages is, in the beginning, maybe you can drive agriculture and manufacturing up and up and up, but eventually resources start to go down and pollution starts to go up, as we saw in that basic ecological diagram. And the consequences of that is that agriculture goes down and manufacturing goes down, and then the population goes down. Overshoot is not a state that continues forever. And if you want to hear more about this study, here's an hour-long podcast about it. It's really good. I recommend it as well as their other episodes. And one final point, contrary to apocalypse fiction, this doesn't mean immediate death for everyone in the very near future, but also this isn't like a problem that your kids will have to deal with later down the line. Everything that we've done to the planet means that we are on the brink of things starting to go downhill in a pretty big way pretty soon. And that limits to growth chart that I showed doesn't even factor in climate. Plus, all the big tragedies that you can think of for the past century or two, the wars, the terrorist attacks, the financial crises, the COVID pandemic, the insurrection, all that's been happening while at the global civilization scale, the food supply has been increasing, fuel has been increasing, technology has been advancing, electricity has been reliable. So compared to what we've known so far, we are talking about things getting more difficult on a whole other level. But that's all the time we have for now. So hey, check out my Substack for more.